Admiral Kython gripped the metal railing as his ship shook from another explosion nearby. Through the thick glass of the bridge, he could see one of their own cruisers breaking apart like a toy. Pieces of metal and fire scattered into the cold darkness of space. The ship had been there just seconds ago, full of brave soldiers fighting for their lives. Now it was nothing but glowing debris. "Another one down," whispered his second-in-command, her voice barely audible over the alarms blaring throughout the bridge. The red warning lights cast eerie shadows on everyone's faces, making them look like ghosts. For 6 long months, what remained of the Third Fleet had been running and dying. Every day brought more bad news. Every battle meant fewer ships returning home. The enemy seemed endless, their strange living vessels pulsing with that horrible green light that had become the stuff of nightmares for every coalition soldier. The hegemony's bioships were unlike anything they had ever faced before. These weren't normal metal spacecraft built in shipyards. These things were alive, breathing, growing. Their hulls would heal themselves even as you shot at them. Their weapons seemed to learn from each battle, getting smarter and deadlier. Worst of all, they never seemed to get tired or scared like normal crews would. Admiral Kython had been fighting wars for 30 years. He had seen battles across dozens of star systems. He had commanded fleets that could destroy entire planets. But nothing had prepared him for this. The hegemony didn't just want to defeat them or take their territory. They wanted to consume everything living and turn it into more of themselves. The coalition had been formed by 7 different alien species, all proud civilizations with their own ways of fighting. The swift Tyrellians with their lightning-fast attack ships, the massive Vorthak with their heavy battle cruisers, the clever Ixarians with their advanced technology. Each species brought their best warriors and finest ships to fight this threat. It hadn't been enough, not even close. "Sir, we just lost contact with Battle Group 7, reported the communications officer, his forearms working frantically at his control panel. "That's the last of our heavy cruisers in the outer ring." Kython closed his eyes for a moment. Battle Group 7 had been their strongest remaining unit. 12 ships with crews of nearly 8,000 soldiers. All gone in the time it took him to blink. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. 43 vessels still responding to our signals, sir. Most of them are damaged. We have maybe 6 ships that are still at full fighting strength. From over 2,000 ships that had started this campaign, they were down to 43. The numbers felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Each lost ship meant thousands of families who would never see their loved ones again. The enemy kept coming like a green tide of death. Their bioships moved in perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. They attacked in waves that seemed calculated to cause maximum fear and confusion. When one was damaged, others would surround it and somehow transfer their life, forced to heal it. The coalition forces had never seen anything like it. "Sir, we're getting something on the emergency frequency," Communications Officer Veldar suddenly announced, his voice cutting through the despair that had settled over the bridge like fog. Everyone turned to look at him. Emergency frequencies were only used for the most critical messages. Usually, it meant someone was dying and calling for help they knew wouldn't come. "Sir, this is strange. The signal is coming from the direction of the Sol system." A chill ran through everyone on the bridge. Sul was where the humans lived, or where they used to live. The human home system had gone completely silent 3 months ago when the hegemony's first wave had swept through their space. Every attempt to contact Earth had failed. Most military analysts assumed humanity had been completely wiped out, their entire species added to the hegemony's growing army of converted biomass. "The transmission is very weak, sir. Lots of interference. But I'm definitely picking up human vocal patterns." Kython felt his heart skip. Could it be possible? Had some humans somehow survived? "Put it through the main speakers," he ordered. The bridge fell completely silent except for the crackling static. Then, through the noise, came a voice that was unmistakably human. It was calm, steady, almost casual, completely different from the panicked communications they had been hearing from fleeing coalition ships. "This is Admiral Lee Jin-ho of the Terran Stellar Navy. All coalition forces maintain your current positions and prepare for immediate tactical support. We're bringing reinforcements to your location. The words seemed impossible. Reinforcements? From where? The humans were supposed to be extinct, but then the sensors started screaming. The space around Admiral Kython's fleet suddenly twisted and bent like someone was folding a piece of paper. The stars themselves seemed to stretch and warp as something massive pushed its way through the fabric of reality. Every sensor on every ship started going crazy, beeping and flashing warnings about gravitational distortions that shouldn't be possible. "What in the name of the ancestors is that?" whispered the sensor operator, his tentacles shaking as he tried to make sense of the readings flooding his screens. Then it appeared. The first human dreadnought dropped out of hyperspace like a dark mountain falling from the sky. It was enormous beyond anything Kython had ever seen. The ship stretched for kilometers, its black hull scarred and dented from countless battles. Thick armor plates covered every surface, each one looking strong enough to build an entire city on. The whole thing looked less like a spacecraft and more like a floating fortress designed by someone who expected to fight gods. "By all the stars," breathed Kython's second-in-command. "How big is that thing?" "Computer estimates an 18 kilometers long, sir. Mass readings are... This can't be right. It's heavier than our entire remaining fleet combined." The human ship didn't look pretty or sleek like coalition vessels. There were no smooth curves or artistic designs. Every angle was sharp and purposeful. Gun turrets covered the hull like the spines on some ancient monster from the deep ocean. Each weapon looked big enough to destroy a city. The whole ship radiated one simple message. This was built to kill things, and it was very good at its job. But they weren't done yet. A second dreadnought materialized right next to the first one, then a third, then more, appearing one after another like pieces of a nightmare becoming real. Each one was slightly different but just as massive and threatening. Some had more guns, others had thicker armor. All of them looked like they had been through hell and come out stronger. Counting 12. No, 15. 18 massive contacts. The sensor operator reported, his voice getting higher with each number. "Sir, I've never seen ships this big. Each one could take on our entire fleet by itself." The hegemony's bioships, which had been advancing in their usual coordinated swarm, suddenly stopped moving. For the first time since the war began, they seemed confused. Their pulsing green lights flickered uncertainly. Even their alien intelligence appeared to be struggling to understand what they were looking at. The coalition fleet was equally stunned. Every ship in their ragged formation had gone completely silent. Crews pressed against viewports, staring at the impossible sight before them. These weren't just big ships. They were monuments to human determination, floating proof that humanity was very much alive and extremely angry. Admiral Park's voice crackled over the communication system, cutting through the shocked silence like a knife. "All coalition vessels, this is Admiral Sujin Park speaking to you from the TNS Indomitable. Sorry we're late to the party, but we needed some time to dig these old girls out of storage and remember how they work." His tone was almost casual, like he was discussing the weather instead of the biggest fleet anyone had ever seen. "We've been watching this fight from a distance, and we have to say, you folks have been doing great work. But now it's time to end this properly." A pause, then his voice hardened. "All Dreadnought commanders, this is Admiral Park, weapons free. Let's show these parasites why humanity doesn't make friends easily, but we're very loyal to the ones we do make." What happened next would be talked about for centuries. The 18 dreadnoughts opened fire at exactly the same moment. But instead of the energy beams and plasma bolts that every other species used, the human weapons were completely different. They fired solid metal, huge chunks of specially designed materials accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic rails that ran the length of each ship. The projectiles were moving so fast they were almost invisible. When they hit the hegemony bioships, the results were devastating. These living vessels that had shrugged off every weapon the coalition could throw at them were simply torn apart. Their healing abilities meant nothing when faced with pure kinetic energy. You can't regenerate from being physically smashed into pieces. The first volley destroyed 12 bioships in less than 3 seconds. The second volley got 15 more. The green glowing enemy fleet that had seemed so unstoppable suddenly looked fragile and helpless. "Incredible," whispered Kython. "They're not using advanced energy weapons or exotic matter. They're just throwing metal really, really hard." The human strategy was brutally simple and terrifyingly effective. While other species had spent centuries developing sophisticated weapons, humanity had perfected the art of hitting things with other things at very high speeds. It was primitive in concept but devastating in execution. The tide of battle had turned completely in less than 5 minutes. Admiral Kython couldn't believe what he was seeing. A hegemony bioship the size of a space station, one that had been terrorizing coalition forces for months, simply split in two like someone had cracked an egg. The massive living vessel that could regenerate from almost any damage was now floating in pieces, its green glow fading to black. "How are they doing this?" he asked aloud, his voice filled with amazement and confusion. His crew was equally stunned, watching their sensors as the human weapons tore through enemy ships like they were made of paper. Admiral Kim's voice came through the communication system, and Kython could hear the slight amusement in her tone. "It's basic physics, Admiral. Mass times velocity equals a very bad day for whoever's on the receiving end. When you throw enough metal at something fast enough, it doesn't matter how fancy their energy shields are." The explanation was so simple it was almost insulting. While every other species had spent thousands of years developing complex energy, weapons, exotic plasma cannons, and sophisticated particle beams, the humans had perfected the ancient art of throwing rocks, very big rocks, very fast rocks. "But the energy requirements alone," protested Kython's science officer. "To accelerate projectiles to those speeds should require massive power plants." "We've got massive power plants," came another human voice, this one belonging to Admiral Cho aboard a dreadnought whose hull was already scarred from enemy fire. "Turns out when your entire species is fighting for survival, you get really creative about engineering solutions." The human ships moved nothing like coalition vessels. There was no elegant dancing around the battlefield, no graceful swooping attacks. The dreadnoughts advanced in a straight line like a wall of metal and death. They absorbed incoming fire that would have crippled other ships and kept moving forward. Their formation was tight, disciplined, and absolutely terrifying to watch. What made it even more frightening was how they reacted to damage. When coalition ships took heavy hits, standard procedure was to withdraw, repair, and return to fight another day. The humans seemed to have a completely different philosophy. "Admiral Cho, we're reading massive damage to your forward sections," came a concerned transmission from one of the coalition observers. "Hull breach on deck 7 through 12, reported Cho's damage control officer over the open channel. "Forward armor is at 30%. Main gun turret 3 is offline. We've got fires on multiple levels." There was a pause, and everyone listening expected the human ship to pull back for repairs. Instead, Admiral Cho's voice came back steady and determined. "Copy that, damage control. Helm, bring us about for another attack run. Transfer power from non-essential systems to the main guns. Today seems like a good day for killing something that needs killing." The coalition officers exchanged glances. This wasn't normal military thinking. Most species fought to minimize casualties and preserve their forces. The humans were fighting like they didn't care about their own survival as long as they took the enemy with them. But it was working. The hegemony bioships, which had seemed so unstoppable before, were being systematically destroyed. They're living. Hulls that could heal from energy weapon damage were helpless against solid projectiles moving at incredible speeds. When a railgun slug hit them, there was nothing left to heal. They were simply torn apart at the molecular level. "Look at their tactics," observed Kython's tactical officer, studying the human formation on the display screen. "They're not trying to outmaneuver the enemy. They're just walking through them like they're not even there." It was true. The human dreadnoughts maintained their formation even as hegemony ships swarmed around them, firing biological weapons that ate through metal and energy beams that could melt asteroid. The humans took the hits, absorbed the damage, and kept firing back with those devastating kinetic weapons. "Their armor must be incredibly thick," someone commented. "It's not just the armor," came Admiral Park's voice over the communication system. "It's the people inside. We've been fighting wars for our entire history, Every human child learns about conflict before they learn to walk properly. We're very good at taking punishment and giving back twice as much. The battle continued for, hours. Coalition forces watched in fascination as the humans demonstrated a completely different approach to warfare. Where other species tried to fight smart, the humans fought with pure determination and overwhelming firepower. They didn't retreat when damaged. They got angry and fought harder. "Sir, I'm detecting something strange," reported the sensor operator. "The human ships are actually performing better now than when they started. Their accuracy is improving and their rate of fire is increasing." Kython realized what was happening. The human crews were learning during the battle itself, adapting their tactics in real time. Each destroyed enemy ship taught them something new about how to kill the next one more efficiently. The hegemony forces, for the first time since the war began, were retreating. When the last enemy ship finally stopped moving, the silence that followed was almost as shocking as the battle itself. For 16 straight hours, space had been filled with explosions, weapons fire, and the screams of dying ships. Now there was nothing but the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional crackle of cooling metal. Admiral Kython looked out at what remained of both fleets and felt his stomach turn. The hegemony force that had seemed so unstoppable was now nothing but floating debris. Chunks of bioship hull drifted past his viewport, their green glow finally extinguished forever. But the humans had paid a terrible price for their victory. 3 of the massive dreadnoughts were completely gone. He had watched them die during the battle, each one consumed in nuclear fire so bright it had temporarily blinded his ship's sensors. The explosions had been visible from several star systems away. Thousands of human crew members had vanished. In those flashes of light, their final moments spent buying victory for everyone else. 5 more dreadnoughts were barely holding together. Their hulls were blackened and twisted like metal that had been through a furnace. Entire sections were missing, replaced by hastily welded emergency patches that leaked atmosphere into space. Some were listing badly, their internal gravity systems, damaged beyond repair. It was a miracle they were still functional at all. "Sir, we're getting clearance to approach the human flagship," reported his pilot, her voice subdued by what she was seeing. As Kython's shuttle got closer to the TNS, indomitable, he was struck by the incredible amount of damage the ship had absorbed. The massive dreadnought looked like it had been chewed up by some cosmic monster and spat back out. Huge sections of the hull were missing entirely, showing the ship's internal structure like exposed bones. Emergency force fields flickered across the gaps, the only thing keeping the crew from being sucked into space. The armor plating that had looked so thick and impenetrable before the battle was now scarred and cracked. Some areas had been heated to such extreme temperatures that the metal had flowed like liquid before cooling into strange, twisted shapes. Weapons turrets hung at odd angles, their barrels bent or completely blown away. "How is that thing still flying?" wondered his co-pilot. It was a good question. By any reasonable standard, the Indomitable should have been a drifting wreck. But somehow the humans had kept her fighting until the very end. Emergency lights blinked across her hull where normal lighting systems had failed. Repair crews in spacesuits crawled over her surface like tiny insects, welding patches and rerouting power lines even as they approached the docking bay. The docking bay itself was a mess. Blast doors hung crooked on their hinges. The deck was covered with debris from internal explosions, but human crew members were already cleaning up, moving with the efficient purpose of people who had important work to do and no time to waste feeling sorry for themselves. Admiral Song was waiting for him when he stepped off the shuttle. Kython had seen her picture in intelligence briefings, but the reality was much more shocking. Her uniform was burnt and torn. Medical patches covered half her face, and her left arm was in a makeshift sling. She looked like she had been through hell, but her eyes were alert and her posture was straight. "Admiral Kython," she said, extending her good hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable. Sorry about the mess. We're still learning how to fight these things efficiently." Kython stared at her in disbelief. "Efficiently? Admiral Song, you just destroyed an entire hegemony invasion fleet in a single engagement. A force that had been terrorizing this sector for months. In one day you accomplished what our combined fleets couldn't do in years of fighting. Song shrugged, a gesture that seemed to be universal among humans. Well, that's what happens when someone kicks down your front door and tries to kill your neighbors. You don't worry about being efficient or following proper military doctrine. You grab the biggest hammer you can find and hit them until they stop moving. She gestured toward the twisted wreckage visible through the docking bay's damaged windows. The hegemony made one critical mistake. They assumed we were like every other species they had encountered, civilized, reasonable, willing to negotiate or surrender when faced with superior odds. Her expression hardened. They didn't understand that humans have been fighting wars since before we learned to make fire. We've been perfecting the art of organized violence for thousands of years. When someone threatens our survival, we don't get scared. We get angry. And angry humans are very, very dangerous. Kython followed her through corridors that showed blast damage and emergency repairs everywhere. Human crew members nodded respectfully as they passed but continued their work without stopping. Everyone seemed to have something urgent to do. "This can't be your entire fleet," Kython said. 18 dreadnoughts, even ones this size, couldn't represent humanity's full military capacity. Admiral Song smiled for the first time since he had met her. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Oh, this? This is just the first wave. We have 17 more fleets exactly like this one scattered across human space. Every shipyard in our territory is working around the clock to build more. The hegemony wanted to start a war with humanity." She looked back at the wreckage of the enemy fleet drifting outside. Now they have one. 6 months after that first devastating battle, the war was over. What had started as humanity's desperate return from the edge of extinction had become the most systematic military campaign the galaxy had ever witnessed. The human dreadnought fleets didn't just fight, they hunted. Every time the scattered hegemony forces tried to regroup somewhere, human ships would appear like avenging angels. The bioships that had once seemed so terrifying were now helpless prey. Their ability to heal and regenerate meant nothing when faced with weapons that simply tore them apart faster than they could repair themselves. It was like trying to heal from being hit by a meteor. Admiral Kython had followed the human campaign through intelligence reports and direct observation. What impressed him most wasn't just their firepower, but their relentless efficiency. The humans didn't take breaks. They didn't negotiate. They didn't show mercy to an enemy that had shown none to countless worlds. They simply found hegemony forces and destroyed them, moving from system to system like a methodical extermination service. The final battle was the stuff of legends. Deep in hegemony space, protected by layers of bioship defenders, sat their queenship. This wasn't just a vessel, it was a living planet, grown over centuries into a massive spawning ground for their invasion fleets. For decades, this thing had been producing the bioships that terrorized the galaxy. Its surface was covered with breeding chambers, weapon systems, and defensive structures that made it nearly impossible to approach, let alone attack. Every military analyst in Coalition space had studied the queenship. The general consensus was that it would take years of careful planning and the combined fleets of multiple species to even attempt an assault. The casualties would be enormous, and success was far from guaranteed. Humanity's response was typically direct. They found an asteroid in a nearby system, installed massive engines on it, and accelerated it to nearly the speed of light. Then they aimed it at the queenship like the largest bullet ever fired. The impact was beyond catastrophic. When that chunk of rock and metal hit the biological planet at relativistic speeds, the explosion could be seen from 3 star systems away. It was like watching a second sun born and die in the space of a few seconds. The queenship, along with all its defensive fleets and spawning facilities, was simply vaporized. With their central command destroyed, the remaining hegemony forces across the galaxy began dying off within weeks. Without the queenship's constant biological signals, the scattered bioships lost coordination and eventually shut down completely. The threat that had consumed entire civilizations was ended not by years of careful warfare, but by humans throwing one very large rock very, very hard. Now, months later, Admiral Kython stood on the observation deck of his rebuilt flagship. watching human construction vessels help repair the Caltherian orbital habitats around his homeworld. The humans worked with the same methodical determination they had shown in battle. Their ships were practical, efficient, and built to last. No fancy decorations or artistic touches, just solid engineering designed to get the job done. They're really not like us at all, are they? Observed Commander Velshin, standing beside him at the viewport. Kython nodded slowly. It was true. The other coalition species prided themselves on their sophisticated approaches to everything. Their weapons were elegant. Their ships were beautiful. Their tactics were refined by centuries of military tradition and careful study. The humans had learned to fight with one simple goal: win at any cost. There was no artistry in their warfare, no elaborate strategies or clever maneuvering. They found the most effective way to destroy their enemies and then applied that method with overwhelming force. It was brutally simple and terrifyingly effective. Look at that. Velshin pointed to a human dreadnought passing by their position. Even months after the war's end, the massive ship still bore scars from that first battle. Its hull was patched and scarred, but it was still functional, still ready for war if needed. They could have repaired all that damage by now, Velshin continued. But they choose to keep the scars, like they're reminders. Kython understood. The humans weren't keeping those battle scars out of laziness or lack of resources. They were keeping them as warnings. Every dent and burn mark told the same story. This is what happens when you threaten humanity or their friends. The galaxy was at peace now, but it was a very different kind of peace than before. The old balance of power was gone forever. Humanity had emerged from near extinction to become the dominant military force in known space. Their dreadnought fleets patrolled the major trade routes like protective guardians, ensuring that nothing like the hegemony could ever threaten civilized worlds again. I think you're right, Kython finally said to his companion. They're not like us at all. We fight with honor and tradition and careful strategy. They fight to win, period. He watched as the lights of the human fleet twinkled in the distance, like stars. Beautiful, peaceful stars that carried the promise of terrible violence for anyone foolish enough to threaten the peace they now protected. And maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needed, he concluded. Someone who doesn't fight fair, doesn't follow the rules, and doesn't stop until the job is completely finished. The age of the Dreadnoughts had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same again.